Hey everybody, welcome to the first episode of Three Chords and the Truth, where today I'll be talking about singer-songwriter Doak Snead and his first album, Think of Me Sometime, that came out in 1977 on Crazy Cajun Records. But first, I gotta give a big thank you to Doak for all his help and his information and interviews that he shared with me, because without that, this episode wouldn't be possible. So thank you so much, Doak. Doak and his band first arrived in Austin in June of 1973. They were one of the only bands doing all original material at the time. Doak took pride in being called a thinking man's country singer, where his writing came first and his singing came second. Some of the people that the Doak Snead band played with and opened for around town were people like Kenneth Threadgill, Asleep at the Wheel, Freddie King, Mance Linscomb, Ramblin' Jack Elliott, who I'll talk about later, John Prine, Greasy Wheels, Loudon Wainwright, New Riders of Purple Sage, and Willie Nelson, who I'll also talk about later. The first time that Doak Snead band played at the Armadillo, Doak told me that he thought that they had made it big time, because when a band plays at the Armadillo, that's when you start to get noticed at the national level. Similar to that when you play with Willie at his annual picnic. Unfortunately, Doak told me that his band parted ways before they ever got the chance to play at Willie's picnic. I told Doak that I would like to know more about the Armadillo, since it doesn't exist anymore, and living in Austin, it's such a part of our culture. I wanted to know what it was like playing there, what the crowd was like, what the building was like, just everything. So he shared it all with me. He said, first off, it was an old National Guard armory, so the building was massive on the inside. It was dark, windows all up top. When you walked in, your first hit with the smell of beer and sweat and mostly patchouli. Walking in, he said there was a mural on the left-hand side he remembers it being massive. It was of Freddie King, and Jim Franklin did it. He's one of the founders of one of the guys behind the starting of the Armadillo. And he said the offices were up front and the studios were upstairs. There were two stages inside. You had your big main one, which was kind of towards the back, and you had a little half stage off to the side. There in the back, there was a third stage in the beer garden, and Doak said over time they played it at all three stages. And he said he remembered, it was always just so goddamn hot in that place. He never really remembered that place having air conditioning. That's probably why, all those smells stood out so much. He said there are tons of people that work there. One of those people being Jan Beeman, who would later go on to become the Doak Snead band manager. And another person who worked there would later be Doak's first wife. And talking about playing there, Doak said, on the big main stage, that it was a very intimidating stage, especially if you weren't connecting with the crowd. It would be a long and lonely set for you that night. And at first, he said, Doak Snead band wasn't all that energetic. And so they were kind of a bit more folky. So he soon made some changes, and he added some horns and drums. And quickly, the Doak Snead band caught on with the crowd, and they became, instantly a crowd favorite at the Armadillo. He told me that, just about at any given show, they'd have upwards of 100 people at their shows. They ended up playing there upwards of like 50 plus times, putting them in the top 5 of all-time bands ever playing at the Armadillo. That's quite a list to be on. And he said one night in particular, in 1974, just to show you how big the Doak Snead band got in a short amount of time. They came in 73 and in 74. They, in between their sets, they had people play while they're on break. People like Marty Robbins and Homer and Jethro, Roy Rogers, Walter Brennan, Hoagie Carmichael, and Cab Calloway. I mean, that's pretty huge. And just a couple of days after that show, they went on to film what was one of the first, if not the first, Shiner Beer commercials. So it shows you just how big the Doak Snead Band was at that time. One of the main bands in Austin. And also in 1974, a couple times, they played with Willie Nelson twice at what was called the Johnny Mac Brown Nights. And Johnny Mac Brown was an actor in a lot of cowboy movies. And at these events, which was held at the Ritz Theater on East 6 downtown at what is now the Alamo Draft House Ritz. You know, it was vacant at the time, or the rooms that they were held this place in was vacant. And there would be dinner first, and then they would have play a Johnny Mac Brown movie or two, and then the bands would play, and they did that twice with Willie Nelson in 1974, and the admission was a whopping $2. You can see the art and that poster for that event on the website at threechordsandthetruth.org. And also another funny little story that happened around that time. Well, one night they were opening for Ramblin' Jack Elliott, and he said Jack walked out on stage, and Jack was already so goddamn stoned. Jack played like 2 or 3 songs, but Jack thought he had already played an entire set. And after the second or third song, Jack threw his hands up in the air and said, "All right, everybody, thank you, good night," and walked off. And the crowd was like, "What the hell?" And Doak said he thinks that Jack came out and finished his set that night. But by now, the scene in Austin was in full swing, and BMI had gotten word of this outlaw, cosmic cowboy, progressive country, whatever you want to call it, scene happening down in Austin. So they came down. Armadillo caught word BMI was coming down. They told all their artists, "You guys got to get down here." So any and everybody who was a musician in Austin came down. And there were only a handful of people in Austin at the time who had record deals. People like Jerry Jeff Walker, Michael Martin Murphy, Stephen Fromholtz, and B.W. Stevenson. And just prior, there hadn't really been a whole lot of people who've come out of Austin. In the 60s, the biggest band to come out was the Giesenslaw Brothers, who were kind of a comedic country duo. And then in the late 60s up into the early 70s, the hottest band around who kind of started the whole outlaw movement, who laid the groundwork for it, were Frida and the Fire Dogs. And so some time went by, and Doak Snead Band performed, all over town, and then he kind of realized they weren't coming up with any new material. So kind of brought the guys together, and they agreed to part ways. And so Doak Snead Band broke up, and Doak headed west. Got out of town where he could think more clearly. He said he was able to meditate and write songs, and it was just a lot more clear for him. He liked being out there. So in 1977, Doak took his new material to Houston, to Sugar Hill Studios, ran by Huey P. Moe at Crazy Cajun Records. It's the same Huey P. Moe who produced Freddie Fender's biggest hit, Before the Next Teardrop Falls, and Doug Soames' She's About to Move Her. And one of the guys at Crazy Cajun Records was Danny Epps. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Danny Epps, he was kind of a Renaissance man. He was held in the same regards as a songwriter, in the same vein as Townes Van Zandt and Willie Nelson and Chris Christopherson. Doak said that Danny was a huge driving force of this album getting out. Think of Me Sometime. He said Danny was a huge mentor, and he co-wrote the title song on this album, Think of Me Sometime. He shared with me, he said Danny toured with Bobby Bear and Billy Joe Shaver, and Danny was a really good friend of Billy Joe. And he told me a fun little fact that the hat that Doak is actually wearing on the album cover is Billy Joe Shaver's. But the story behind the hat will remain a secret. So maybe I'll get that out of Doak in the future. But until then, it'll remain a secret. Um, Fast forward to today, Doak went to the new exhibit at the Country Music Hall of Fame, which is the Outlaws and Armadillos, highlighting the huge music scene in Austin in the 70s. And Doak said he got off the elevator, and who's standing there but Billy Joe Shaver. So they greet each other, they kind of can't believe that they're seeing each other, and they catch up, and then he said, Billy Joe said, "Doak, can you believe it? We're finally here. We've made it to the Country Music Hall of Fame. We're finally here. We made it." And Doak has some stuff in the Country Music Hall of Fame in the exhibit, and you can see it. It's one I think it's a poster with the greasy wheels. But back to this album, Think of Me Sometime. This is an album I hold in very high regards. It stands with me up there with Guy Clark's Old Number One that I have right up there. You guys can't see it, just off camera. I hold it right up there, near and dear to me. You can hear the influence of the times on this album. Doak and Guy just have a natural similarity in their voices and in their writing style. The song that stands out the most to me on this album, I think that's my personal favorite, is Dead Dog Blues. You can hear what I'm talking about the similarities of Guy Clark. The speed and the cadence, the tempo, and even their voices are really similar. But Dead Dog Blues is by far just an amazing song. I think Doak should be considered with the legendary songwriters like Guy Clark and Townes Van Zandt when you think of the Austin music scene in the 70s, for sure. And also in 1978, the very next year, Doak came out with this album, Powderhorn, 1978. Lloyd Maines produced that and played electric guitar and steel on that. And that's the same Lloyd Maines that was inducted into the Austin Music Hall of Fame, one of 3 people the very first year with Willie Nelson and Stevie Ray Vaughan. So that's a huge thing. And in 1978 and 1977, to go back, was a really busy year for Doak. That was when he performed at the Kerrville Festival, and Townes Van Zandt was a judge that year, alongside his fellow Heartworn Highways compadre Steve Young. Doak didn't take top prize that year. They said his sound didn't exactly fit the Kerrville sound. But some other people that he played with that year were people like Joe Ely and Gary P. Nunn, and Townes also performed at the festival that year. Doak became a regular at Kerrville after that, and then in the 10th anniversary, 1981, Doak performed again, and that weekend he played with people like Joe Ely, Townes, Rusty Weir, Gary P. Nunn, Uncle Walt's band, and Ray Wiley Hubbard. So again, with all of the Austin legends, Doak is always there. And after that, a relationship with Townes was established. They were good friends by then, and Doak and Townes would spend a lot of time writing together, and privately, and then singing each other's songs. And then they would go out in the town and they would sing each other's songs and play together. And Doak told me about a time when he went and stayed with Townes and his wife Janine at their place at Old Hickory Lake. And this is a great story. And he said in the morning, Doak got woken up to Townes kind of tossing the place, and he was looking for his whiskey. First thing in the morning, wakes up and eats whiskey. And he said, he was looking everywhere, making a racket, and then once Townes realized that Janine had hidden his whiskey, he knew where to look. He went straight to the spot he thought it would be, and there it was. So Townes started drinking his whiskey first thing in the morning, and Doak said he remembered Townes must have had seemed like $50 in change in his pockets, and Towns tried to just mess with Doak and tried to get him to gamble and bet first thing in the morning, and Doak was like, "No, I don't want to start gambling and betting right now." And then Towns was like, "All right, let's go for a ride." So Towns grabbed his big trench coat, and they hopped in Towns' blue Bonneville, and they went for a ride. And it was on that ride where Doak said Towns began to act like he was too drunk to drive and messing with Doak, acting like he's swerving, hollering at Doak, kind of nudging him like, "Oh, I'm too drunk to drive. I'm losing control. I can't get control of my car." And Doak, knew that Towns was yanking his chain, and after a few tries to convince Doak that he was too drunk to drive, Towns kind of quit the shenanigans. But Doak veered off, Towns veered off and said, I've got it. So they pulled over to this little picnic area, and they got out and got all their guitars and recording, and they sat down in this little picnic area. And Towns said, "All right, we're outlaws. We've just robbed a bank, and we're shacking up here at this cabin by the lake, and the cops are after us." So Doak said they recorded the song, but unfortunately nothing ever came of it. So I asked Doak, "Does that tape still exist? Is it somewhere?" And he said, "Oh, he knows exactly where it's at." He said he may pull it out here sometime soon and record it and give Towns the co-write on it, because they co-wrote the song together. And it was around that time, Doak was traveling back and forth from Texas to Nashville, that Doak finally moved to Nashville at the behest of Towns. Towns had lived there for a couple of years, and when Doak got to town, Towns took Doak immediately to the Cowboy Arms Hotel and Spa, which was owned by Jack Clement. And for those of you who don't know, Jack Clement was best friend of Johnny Cash. Wrote tons of songs, produced tons of Johnny Cash's records. Same with Jerry Lee Lewis, Carl Perkins, and Roy Orbison. And also in that meeting was when Doak first met Bob Clement, Jack's cousin. Let me see here. And while living in Nashville when Doak started working at the Country Music Hall of Fame. And Doak did that for 3 years, and that was when he met his wife, Kelly. And Kelly worked there for 10 years, and they wrote songs together, they sang songs together. Doak sang her songs, and Doak said it was while working there, he would scour the archives of the Country Music Hall of Fame for anything on the Austin music scene in the 70s that he was a part of, and he couldn't find anything. But the only thing he could find was stuff on Asleep at the Wheel and Alvin Crow. He said there wasn't anything on Willie Nelson back then. He sang he guessed time just had to go by first. So he worked there for 3 years, and in 1992, him and Kelly got married. In 1993, Doak got a huge job working for Reba McEntire as a writer at her Starstruck publications. So he did that, and then shortly after, he went and recorded and self-produced 4 albums. And then in 2008, the Doak Snead Band reunited here in Austin at Threadgills, and they recorded an album which is called After 33 and a Third Years, After 33 and a Third RPMs. And then sadly in 2017, Doak lost his writing and singing partner and wife, Kelly, to Parkinson's. And it was then that Doak released a compilation album entitled Catalog, which I have here, that Doak so graciously gave me. It's a beautiful song of all of his songs that he wrote and Kelly wrote over the years, and it's just a remarkable album that Doak holds in very high regards, and rightfully so. And just a year later, or let me rewind there for a second. At his wife's funeral, the very first person that walked through the doors, Doak told me, was Bob Clement, who he had met in Nashville, some 30 years prior. So they talked for a little bit, and talked about his wife and Doak, and they both agreed that what was best for Doak was to get back in the studio and make some new music, and so that's exactly what they did. In 2018, Doak released his newest album, A Welcome Affair, which Doak also gave to me. And I love this album. I can't tell you how many times I've listened to this album. It definitely hits the ground running, and with the opening song, Meet the Renaissance Man. I mean, Doak really gives it to you soon. And I say it's either Meet the Renaissance Man or Come and Get Your Rock that are the staples on this album. And Doak is not, he never missed a beat from 1977 with Think of Me Sometime to A Welcome Affair. It's his songwriting is still there. He's still got it. This album, I will say, reminds me a lot of Johnny Cash's America series, as well as Guy Clark's later work. They always kind of sound the same to me. And then what I think this album most closely resembles is John Prine's The Tree of Forgiveness. There's just so much life and love and memories on this album that Doak is singing. It's just so true. It's just an unbelievable album. And like I mentioned in the beginning, that I had the fortunate opportunity to meet Doak. I reached out to him and told him I was going to be doing this episode about him, and he told me he was going to be in Texas. So he invited me to this private party where him and his original bassist, Woody Lawson, were at, and Armadillo artist Sam Yates were there. So it was just an evening of hanging out with all of these Doak Snead band fans and people who have been in Austin since the late 60s and 70s. So it was like old Austin again, watching the Doak Snead band do what they do best. They didn't miss a beat. They rocked the place the whole night. Doak was he's an amazing guy. I hope I can now call him a friend. We chat back and forth on the phone. We'll text. We talk on the phone. But this is just the beginning of Doak. Hopefully he's gonna start touring and showing everybody his new album. It's something to be really proud of. I'm really proud of Doak and this album, and you guys need to go listen to it. You can order this new album on the website at threechordsandthetruth.org. So you can go buy it on there, and everything will go to Doak. It's linked to Doak's site, and everything that I have talked about today in this video will be at threechordsandthetruth.org underneath the Doak Snead episode page. So with that, I will say thank you so much for watching. I know this has been long. This is the first episode of many. The next is on Steve Fromholtz. But yeah, thank you so much for watching, and go listen to some Doak Snead, old and new. Thank you so much, guys. Have a good one.